All right, Mr. Chair, we're good to go.
All right, thank you. Let me call to order the meeting of the San Ramon Planning Commission for Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021. Before the roll call is made, the city attorney would like to enlighten us about the ins and outs of the meeting tonight. Ms. Boone.
Thank you, Chair Wallace. Prior to roll call, I'd like to make clear for the record of this meeting, and it should be reflected in the minutes, that the governor has issued executive orders relaxing the requirements pertaining to remote meetings under the Brown Act. The executive orders authorize this planning commission to hold public meetings by teleconference during the COVID-19 crisis. I previously went over the specific provisions of the Brown Act that have been temporarily amended or suspended in order to allow for this meeting to take place by teleconference. And this meeting will comply with all such provisions. Madam Recording Secretary, it would now be appropriate for you to conduct roll call, after which I would ask the chair to recognize me in order to confirm certain matters for the record. Thank you.
All right, roll call. Commissioner Alford.
Here.
Commissioner Frank.
Here.
Commissioner Marks.
Here.
Vice Chair Kuznick. Here. And Chair Wallace.
I'm here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chavez. Now I'd like to recognize Ms. Poon, who is the second box down from the left.
Thank you again, Chair Wallace. I would now like to ask the chair, the vice chair, and the other commission members 3 questions. And rather than ask you to respond separately to these 3 questions, I'll ask all of them. And if the answer is yes to all 3, please say yes and physically raise your hand. Question 1, can you hear me well? Question 2, have you been able to hear all previous speakers, including the roll call, clearly? And question 3, are you satisfied based on facial or voice recognition or otherwise that everyone here representing themselves to be a commission member is actually the person they are representing themselves to be? I'm asking for a yes and physically raising your hand, please.
Yes.
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 All right, thank you. Seeing all hands raised, the record should reflect that I have received affirmative answers from each commission member present to all 3 questions, that all commission members have indicated that they are able to hear each other and these proceedings clearly, and no commission member has expressed doubt that each and every commission member participating by teleconference is in fact the commission member they are representing themselves to be. And finally, I would now like to advise the chair, the commission members, and the recording secretary that any votes taken during teleconference portion of this meeting must be taken by roll call. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Poon. Ms. Chavez, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Item number 4 on the calendar tonight is public comment. First of all, Ms. Chavez, could you give some comments to the public about the ins and outs of public comment tonight?
Yes, if you wish to speak under public comment, you may click the raise your hand button on your computer or *9 on your telephone. At this time, members of the public may address the Planning Commission on any item not included in tonight's agenda. All right, and Chair Wallace, I'm going over to our attendees here. I don't see any raised hands for public comment.
Okay. Going once, going twice, closed. Okay. Item number 5 is additions and revisions. We have none. Item 6 is the consent calendar. We have no such items. Item 7.1 is approval of the Planning Commission minutes for the regular meeting of January 5, 2017. Do we have any changes, corrections, or comments on the minutes? Not seeing any heads bobbing up and down. I will entertain a motion to approve.
I'll move approval of the minutes from January 5th, 2021.
I hear
I'll
a second. I hear a second. Okay, the motion's been made and seconded to approve the minutes from the Planning Commission meeting on January 5, 2021. Ms. Chavez, could we have a roll call vote?
Thank you. Yes, can I just confirm, was the seconder Commissioner Frank?
No, it was Commissioner Marks.
Commissioner Marks. Okay, thank you. So we had mover Commissioner Alpert,
Aye.
Commissioner Frank,
Aye.
seconder Commissioner Marks,
Aye.
Vice Chair Kuznick,
Aye.
and Chair Wallace.
Aye.
All
I
right,
like the way
the
you
item
keep us on our toes.
7.1 passes. Thank you.
Okay, item number 8, continued items after closing a public hearing. We have no such items. Item 9, continued items open public hearing. We have none. Item number 10, public hearing, new items. We have none. Now to the main event. Item number 11, non-public hearing action items. 11.1, review of updates to the Contra Costa Transportation Authority, Measure J, Growth Management Program Implementation Guide.
Mouthful.
Ms. Bobadilla, welcome to Tuesday night.
Thank you. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to attend the Planning Commission meetings, albeit it's Zoom. I actually am finding Zoom to be very comfortable though. So anyways, good evening. Welcome, Planning Commissioners and city staff. I'm pleased to be here this evening and would like to also introduce 2 guest speakers with us this evening. We have Matt Kelly, who is a senior transportation planner with the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. And we have David Early, who's a principal with PlaceWorks. Thank you, Matt and David, for joining us. This evening, we are here to provide you with a review and update on the Contra Costa Transportation Authority Measure J Growth Management Program Implementation Guide. Included in your packet this evening is a staff report, the Draft Technical Procedures Implementation Guide, and tonight's PowerPoint presentation. So tonight's presentation will be presented by myself as well. Matt Kelly and David Early will also be presenting this evening. I'm going to focus on the City of San Ramon's role and responsibility with respect to submitting our biannual compliance checklist, and that gives you sort of the bigger picture of what's required by the city when submitting the checklist. And then Matt and David are going to focus really on the technical procedures document that has been changed to reflect change in state legislation that was passed several years ago, Senate Bill 743, which requires local cities, when they're doing a traffic study for CEQA, to implement vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, in lieu of level of service, or LOS, which has been the standard methodology for traffic studies. So traffic studies are one component of our biannual checklist. So I'm going to talk briefly about the checklist, and then Matt and David will talk specifically about traffic studies and those changes to CEQA. At the conclusion of our presentation this evening, all 3 of us are here to answer any questions, and also Lauren is also here as the planning manager, and he can provide you with some feedback as well if needed. And of course, Debbie Chamberlain is here as well, and Debbie's got a lot of good information that she's received from the Transportation Authority on this endeavor as well. So with that, Lauren's going to upload the PowerPoint presentation. He's actually going to drive the presentation for us this evening. He's going to share his screen and we'll start the presentation.
Can you see it?
Yep. Thank you, Lauren. All right, so this evening's, here's a brief outline of the presentation. As I mentioned earlier, I am going to focus on the City of San Ramon, our role and responsibilities with respect to submitting our annual compliance checklist. Matt and David will provide an overview of the implementation guide revisions, and then we'll talk about next steps. Okay, so the City of San Ramon, as well as all cities and towns and Contra Costa County, are required to complete and submit a compliance checklist certifying our jurisdiction's attainment of growth management program standards included in the Measure J expenditure plan. So Measure J is the countywide transportation half-cent sales tax program. In that program, there is a category called local streets and roads. Every year, local streets and roads receives 18% of the Measure J sales tax revenues. That 18% is applied to all cities and towns in Contra Costa County. Based on population and road miles, each city receives their share of local streets and roads funding. In San Ramon, based on our population and road miles, we receive on average about $950,000 per year. However, we will not receive that money until we submit our annual compliance checklist, and that checklist is reviewed and approved by a number of different committees within the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. So here in San Ramon, completing the compliance checklist is implemented by the Public Works Department Transportation Division. We request information from several departments and divisions within the city, including Public Works, and that would be Engineering and Transportation, Community Development Department, the Planning Division, and then from the Admin Services Department, it's the Finance Division. Ultimately, the City Council has to certify our checklist before we submit it to the Transportation Authority. Once we submit it to the Transportation Authority, it gets reviewed by the Contra Costa Transportation Authority Citizen Advisory Committee. That committee is comprised of 21 members. All of those members represent a city or a town in Contra Costa County. Our representative from San Ramon is Billy Hurley. He represents the city on the Contra Costa Transportation Authority Citizen Advisory Committee. So we take our checklist and submit it to the authority. And then about 4 weeks later, we present that checklist to the Citizen Advisory Committee. And I have to say, I've been doing this for a number of years now. That is a very extensive process. The Citizen Advisory Committee, they typically have a lot of questions, and they're always very good questions, but it is not a slam dunk. When you submit your checklist, you are required to answer questions by the Citizen Advisory Committee. Okay, so the Measure J Growth Management Program requires, there are 8 elements that all cities, towns, and the county are responsible for implementing. I'll just briefly touch on these items, and then we're going to focus more on the traffic impact studies. So everybody in this county, all cities, are required to implement action plans. Here in San Ramon, Danville, and the unincorporated area of Contra Costa County, we belong to the Southwest Area Transportation Committee, or SWAT. Within SWAT, we have 2 action plans. We have the TriValley Transportation Action Plan, which is the plan that San Ramon, Danville, and Contra Costa County adhere to. Lafayette, Moraga, and Orinda, they have a La Morinda action plan that they are responsible for complying with. So we have an action plan. It's adopted by the Tri-Valley Transportation Council and by the City Council, and we are required to adhere to all the elements in the action plan. All cities, all towns in Contra Costa County are also obligated to implement development mitigation programs. That's really a traffic fee program. So here at the City of San Ramon, and all of you as planning commissioners, when we submit conditions of approval for a project, you'll see we have traffic mitigation fees. And those fees are supposed to cover infrastructure improvements for new development project, whether it's housing or retail or office. So in San Ramon, we have 4 fees. We have a city traffic impact fee. We have Southern Contra Costa regional fee, and that's required by the Doherty Valley Settlement Agreement. We have Southern Contra Costa sub-regional fee, another fee required by Doherty Valley. And then we have the Tri-Valley Transportation Development Fund. So we have 4 fees that we actually collect. For example, for a single family home, on average, the city collects with all those 4 fees close to $13,000. So again, all cities, towns, and Contra Costa County are required to demonstrate that they have a development mitigation program within their local city. All cities are required to have a housing options and a housing element in their general plan. We are required to conduct traffic impact studies for development projects that are going to exceed 100 new peak hour trips, and Matt and David will be talking specifically about traffic impact studies in just a few moments. Okay, we are also required to participate in multi-jurisdictional transportation planning. So all of the cities in this county, we all belong to a Regional Transportation Planning Committee, or RTPC. We here in San Ramon belong to SWAT, the Southwest Area Transportation Committee. Our representative from the city of San Ramon is Mayor Hudson. SWAT meets once a month, and SWAT, as well as our other 3 regional transportation planning committees, review and discuss transportation studies, transportation projects, and transportation programs that are specific to the local regional transportation planning committee. The rest of the regional committees represent the West County area, Central County, and East County. All 4 of the regional transportation planning committees are required to submit summary of their meetings that are held monthly to the Transportation Authority, and biannually or every other year present action items by the Regional Transportation Planning Committee. All of that information needs to be documented in the City of San Ramon's compliance checklist. We also are required to implement a 5-year capital improvement program. When we bring our capital improvement program to the Planning Commission, that's done once a year, right before the budget is adopted, our city engineer and our CIP analyst present our 5-year capital improvement program. We are required to show the authority that we do adopt on every year a 5-year capital improvement program. We are also required to have a transportation demand ordinance or resolution here at the city. We have a TDM ordinance. We also have a TDM, or Transportation Demand Management Advisory Committee. We're also required, and this is included in our general plan, to implement a growth management element and to demonstrate to the authority how we meet the goals and objectives in our general plan with respect to the growth management element. And then finally, all cities and towns and the county are required to adopt the county's urban limit line, or as such, here in the case of San Ramon, we have our own voter approved adopted urban limit line. We are to demonstrate to the authority that we either have a voter approved, a local voter approved urban limit line, or we've adopted the countywide urban limit line. So once we compile all of that information, we actually submit the checklist to the Transportation Authority. And quite frankly, it could be very extensive, anywhere from 150 pages to, I think the last one we submitted was over 300 pages. Fortunately, we do all that online now, so there's not a lot of printing of paper. But once we submit the checklist, there are a number of committees, as I mentioned earlier, who review the checklist. Ultimately, it's adopted by the Contra Costa Transportation Authority, and then our local roadway funds are forwarded to the city, and we apply those funds to our pavement management program. So the real reason why we're here this evening is to talk about the changes to traffic studies and how cities should and will implement traffic studies in the future. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Kelly and David Early to talk about the changes to the implementation guide. And so with that, Matt, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lisa. That was a great overview of the checklists. Lisa is definitely one of our best checklist preparers and presenters. I'd say after seeing 20 of them every other year, Lisa does an amazing job. So kudos to her and the whole team over there at San Ramon. Chair Wallace and committee members, it's an honor to be in front of you tonight. My name is Matt Kelly. I'm here with David Early from PlaceWorks. PlaceWorks is CCTA's on-call consulting firm for the planning department. Just to give you, before I hand it over to David and he goes through the overview that you see on the screen, I'm just going to add a little on to what Lisa said and give you a little more background on the growth management program. So as Lisa mentioned, it is part of the Measure J sales tax measure. And it really seeks to manage the impacts of land use development on the regional transportation system, which the sales tax is investing in. So it's meant to make the most out of the regional investment or the countywide investment in the transportation system. As Lisa mentioned, all 20 jurisdictions in the county are required to be in compliance with the growth management program in order to receive their return to source funds. And they do that through the checklist. But since Senate Bill 743 passed back in 2013, it was implemented statewide in July, and it really changed the way we analyze the impacts to transportation, both in CEQA and in CEQA they removed level of service, as Lisa mentioned, and replaced it with vehicle miles traveled. Well, the GMP specifically requires use of level of service. And so we decided through our growth management task force and through our board to update the growth management program to reflect that change in metrics and to incorporate VMT into the growth management program. So in July, our board adopted new VMT thresholds and mitigation targets for use by the 20 local jurisdictions, and they would use those new thresholds and targets in their evaluation of land use development projects. And since July, the GMP task force, CCTA staff and our consultants have focused on revising the growth management program implementation guide, which is really the policy guiding document that local jurisdictions utilize in their planning processes. And then the technical procedures, which is kind of a sister document, which spells out how traffic studies are prepared, how general plan amendments are analyzed both by city staff and by hired consultants. So a major focus was updating the chapters related to the action plans for routes of regional significance. And this was proposed for a major overhaul to reflect the changes to state law. So I'm going to hand it over to David now from PlaceWorks. He's going to walk us through the proposed revisions and how that would affect our the action plans moving forward. And then we'll get to our next steps after that. So David.
Great, thank you very much, Matt. Again, I'm David Early, and I'm a senior advisor and founder of PlaceWorks. Our office is in Berkeley, and we've been the on-call planning consultants to CCTA for about 4 years now. It's a pleasure to be able to address you this evening. This presentation goes a little bit sort of into the weeds of some of the technicalities of transportation planning. I'll try and keep it at a high level, and I apologize if it gets too detailed, but I think probably better to get into detail instead of glossing over anything. Let me tell you first that these revisions to the implementation guide do stem from several different city input processes that CCTA has led with your city and all the other cities and the county within Contra Costa County. Lisa participated in seminars that were mostly attended by planning directors in 2018 and early 2019. And then Lisa has been a key member of our growth management plan task force since that time, which has reviewed this information and given quite a bit of feedback and input about it. And the real gist here is the second set of bullets, the numbered items that you see on this slide, items 1 through 6. And what we're doing here is that we're moving from an implementation guide that focuses only on regional roadways, which has been the case for Measure J and before it Measure C since its inception in the 1980s. And we're moving now into a world where we're looking not only at roadways as a mode of transportation, but also the bicycle and pedestrian network, and also the regional transit network, things like BART, rail, ferries, and major bus service. And of course, it's already been the case that that the action plans, including the one in the TriValley, have already been looking at bicycles and pedestrians and in some cases transit. And at the same time, that's been voluntary. The previous requirement was only to look at roadways, and we're now shifting that. So every one of the 5 action plans will be looking at all 3 of these networks, roadways, bike ped, and regional transit. And we're also adding some non-modal issues that we want the action plans to address as well. And those are safety in all transportation modes. And these, I want to say these all apply to safety, to transportation only. So we're looking at safety in transportation modes. We're looking at equity in the transportation system. And that means particularly how can our lower income residents and residents who have been disenfranchised for long periods of time, how can they gain equitable access to all our transportation system? And finally, we're looking at the transportation network's impacts on climate change as the sixth item. So we are going to be asking you, assuming this is approved by the CCTA board, which will be next month, we're going to be asking you to write your new action plans to not only look at regional roadways, but also to look at all 6 of these items that you see on this list. You'll still be also able to add other items to the action plans if you want. That's been the case all along. You will still, as in RTPC, you will continue to have discretion to establish your own metrics, your own goals, your own actions for the action plans. They will still, as they've always been, be up to the RTPCs to develop, but they'll be required to cover these 6 items. And as part of that, just as a housekeeping item, some of you who do talk about these, you might remember talking about what we've been calling MTSOs, which stands for Multimodal Transportation Service Objectives. Well, these objectives are no longer modal. They're no longer multimodal. And so we've changed their names to be Regional Transportation Objectives, or RTOs, and you will be developing in your action plan RTOs for all 6 of these items. Next slide. So just to give a little more information about the modal topics first, these 3 modal topics are going to be covered in the action plans in exactly the way that roadways have been covered to date. That means first that your RTPC for the TriValley will designate and map the routes of regional significance, now not just for the one network, but for all 3 networks. But you've been doing that all along for the roadway network. Then you will be asked to coordinate with adjacent RTPCs regarding any routes that stretch outside of the TriValley area and go into other parts of Contra Costa County. And then it will be up to you, as working with your partners in SWAT and for the TriValley area, it will be up to all of you to establish your area-wide goals, set your RTOs, set measurements methods, and supportive actions, and those will all be placed then into your action plan. So again, this is exactly the same procedure you followed before, but it's now broadened to 3 different networks. Next slide. It'll be a little different for the other 3 non-modal topics. Again, these all apply to transportation, transportation equity, transportation safety, and the climate change impacts of transportation. We're not going to be asking you to set goals for individual facilities, like we won't be saying the number of collisions on this roadway should be X, but instead you would be looking at the subregion as a whole, or perhaps in a subset of the subregion. You'll be trying to figure out what are your equity, safety, and climate change objectives for the subregion as a whole. So those might be, for instance, for climate change, trying to get a certain amount of penetration for electrical vehicle charging stations in certain areas. Or for equity, it may be trying to assure that a certain percentage of lower income people have access to bus passes, something like that. So for each of these topics, you would be looking at setting objectives and implementation measures, not for an individual facility, but sub-regional wide. Next slide. So in the document that we've put together and that will be considered by CCTA next month, there is a chapter 3 that exists today about the action plan process and how action plans are prepared. That's the chapter that has the most changes in it of any in the document. It reflects this broader range of RTOs. It clarifies the interactive consultation process among the RTPCs for the shared facilities. And it adds quite a number of examples of non-roadway RTOs, like the ones I just mentioned. For instance, lower income people getting bus passes, or penetration of vehicle charging. Those kinds of RTOs are explained and given as examples in this chapter 3. Next slide. Chapter 4 goes over some of the impact evaluation processes that Matt and Lisa have already spoken about. It particularly focuses on both major projects that may not be covered already in the growth management plan, and also general plan amendments, where if your city wants to change its general plan, by definition, that has not been included in the existing action plan or GMP, and it needs to be assessed for GMP compliance. So chapter 4 has new and improved and clarified information about how both major projects and GPAs can be addressed through action plan review. in GMP review. And then it also has additional information about transportation impact analyses. And it does go into both maintaining the traditional level of service and delay-based methodologies that we've all come to expect, but it also adds information about how to do the VMT analysis that's now required under state law. Next slide. The other chapters, the changes are much more minor. Chapters 1, 2, 5, 6, 8, and 9 simply edited to reflect this updated terminology about the action plans, the RTOs, VMT, and so forth. Chapter 7 is also being updated to explain VMT as a transportation planning tool, and also removes references to the CEQA process as part of the GMP process. And I wanted just to go into that on the next slide, which is my last slide, just to explain this in a little more depth, and Lisa and Matt have already touched on it, that because of SB 743, and because we're now replacing VMT analysis, we're using VMT analysis now in CEQA documents. That's different from what you all have been doing and will continue to do in your action plan topics and your GMP compliance assessments. And so the CEQA process and the GMP process are now going to be more separate than they previously were. They'll still run about the same way that they did, but you won't necessarily be looking at level of service in a CEQA document. You still can do that if it's at your local discretion to do that, but you're not necessarily required to do that. You will be required in your CEQA document to look at VMT. You won't necessarily be required to look at VMT analysis when you develop your action plans, but you will be looking at those 6 other items, none of which is technically a CEQA item. So there'll be the separation, CEQA on the one hand, primarily focusing on VMT, and the 6 areas that are in the GMP and the action plans that I've talked about already. Your ongoing compliance with both of these, both the CEQA process and the action plan and GMP process, will continue to be required in order for you to receive that return to source funding of 18% that Lisa mentioned at the beginning of this meeting. And so with that, we've kind of come full circle to explain how this all ties into that, that return to source funds. And I'll just turn it back to Matt for one final slide to talk about our next steps before we open it up for your questions.
Thanks, David. Yeah, so for the next couple of months or month or so, we'll be taking this around to the 4 RTPCs around the county for their comments, as well as folks like you. In March, we will be taking this to the CCTA Planning Committee and Board with any comments we've received incorporated for adoption. And then from there, we will update the more technical document, which is creatively titled Technical Procedures, which really get down to the details on how you do a traffic impact analysis, a VMT analysis, general plan analysis, those types of things. Later on in the next few months, we will be putting together a technical advisory committee to guide a VMT mitigation program study to develop a program for Contra Costa County. CCTA was awarded a grant from Caltrans to look at how to develop a framework which would allow projects that would increase VMT to fund projects that would offset VMT or reduce VMT. So it's kind of like a cap and trade or a habitat conservation program type of idea, but with VMT. So we can brief you on that as we get further down the road. It's going to take a couple of years to get through that. And then the action plans that were the focus of this presentation will be updated starting later this year, and that'll go through 2022. The RTPCs, as David mentioned, are responsible for updating those, but CCTA provides consultant support. So that's our work plan for the next couple of years, but we'd certainly be willing to take any questions you have today on any of the topics we've covered over the last half hour.
Oh, well, thank you, gentlemen. Lisa, is there anything else you want to add?
I think the only other thing to add is the TriValley Transportation Council. We plan to start reviewing and updating the TriValley Transportation Action Plan later this summer. And so we will be taking advantage of the support services of the Transportation Authority to help the TriValley update the action plan. Once that's been updated, we are bringing it to City Council. City Council will need to review it. And then it'll go back to TVTC for final adoption.
Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for either Lisa, Mr. Kelly, or Mr. Early? Commissioner Marks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is not per se regarding the GMP process or the planning program, but rather as a planning commissioner who's concerned about traffic in our city, particularly at certain intersections, I want to ask you a question that really gets to the, how do I analyze the impact at particular intersections of land development projects? So please let me read to you a question that I put together, and then I'd like to hear your response. Assume the city is concerned about the impact that a proposed land development proposal will have on the intersection of, let's say, San Ramon Valley Boulevard and Crow Canyon Road, or any other intersection, and identifies that intersection as a study intersection for a CEQA required traffic impact analysis. What information will a VMT analysis provide the Planning Commission regarding that intersection, and what will it tell us about how well that particular intersection will function after the subject land development proposal is constructed and fully occupied? That's my first question.
David, would you like to take
Sure,
that?
I can try and answer that, and I might want to ask Lisa to chime in a little bit on some of your local regulations. But Commissioner Marks, I mean, not to sound too cynical about this, but the short answer is that actually a VMT analysis won't address that intersection set of issues that you're concerned about. And that really underscores the fact that I imagine that I know that CCTA is continuing for regional routes to require assessment of level of service and other delay-based methodologies. And I imagine that the city of San Ramon is going to do so as well at the more local level, and I can at least speak to that. But the big issue with VMT is that it is looking at the regional and climate change impacts of trip making, that the longer the trips and the more dispersed the development, the more greenhouse gases we have. And that's really what the state has determined is the most significant environmental impact from our transportation system, is the creation of those greenhouse gases. And that's why the state legislature and the governor determined that CEQA should be changed to assess those regional trip-making VMT impacts and not to focus on the local impacts. Local impacts are still very important, but they would be addressed both through CCTAs, routes of regional significance, and also through your local general plan policies and other development regulations you would have.
But if I may, as a follow-up to your comment, again, with a particular land development proposal, if we only looked at VMT, which I suspect this was the case, but we won't know what the impacts are on various intersections. So my second question is, under SB 743, is it possible that a city in a traffic impact analysis can require a level of service analysis typical of what we have been getting in addition to VMT analysis?
Yes.
Absolutely, yes. And again, I'll let Lisa speak to that. I'll just say that the jury, so to speak, is still out as to whether it can be a CEQA issue. It can definitely be considered. And there are some practitioners, and I know your city attorney is here, she may have an opinion as well. There are some practitioners who believe that if it's a general plan issue, then policy compliance becomes a CEQA issue and you can review it in a CEQA document. There are other practitioners who believe that in a CEQA document, you're limited only to those areas that can be shown to have a direct impact on an environmental feature that's covered within the CEQA guidelines, which congestion at this time clearly is not. So we don't have a court case about exactly whether you can cover it in an EIR, but the more important point is you can have, if everyone agrees, You can still cover it under city regulation and under your general plan. And I'm sure that Lisa or Alicia or others can speak to how you're going to be doing that under your local regulations.
One final follow-up, and I appreciate the clarity of your answers. Thank you. It may not be a part of the CEQA process per se, but simultaneous to when we are preparing the CEQA document, does that legislation allow us to do what I'll call a typical or traditional LOS study?
Yes, absolutely, as long as it is required in your city procedures.
Okay, then I'll defer any other questions I have to when Lisa makes whatever comments she's going to.
So
Thank you both.
Thank you, David. That was a very good feedback. Commissioner Marks, let me just say that that is a question that every city in this county has asked, because quite frankly, level of service does what it's intended to do, is study impacts at a localized intersection, right? And so if you're doing a traffic study, VMT is going to take this holistic approach at the impacts to the environment, but it's not going to look at a specific intersection. And every traffic engineer will tell you, and we've heard from just about every traffic engineer throughout the county, impacts to a local intersection are what help a local traffic engineer decide those impacts from a development project. So you will find, and we're already seeing this, most cities in this county will continue to require a level of service analysis be done with the traffic study. And I can't speak for the planning division, but I would imagine that, we would require to continue using level of service as a tool to help identify what impacts will occur at a local intersection from any new, whether it's office, retail, or housing development.
Thank you. I will sleep better tonight.
Mr. Alford.
And almost a follow on with Rick, and I sent a few questions over to Lisa in advance, similar to what Commissioner Marks asked. Is this, and I think I VMT in my sort of layperson, it's more of a macro look at traffic, whereas level of service is more of a micro inwardly focused at our city's issues and city traffic. Is it a city policy decision to continue to expect or require applicants to conduct a level of service analysis? And is that a recommendation that you would expect to come from either traffic or from planning or from the planning commission to the city council to adopt that as a general plan component, or just a policy or a decision? Or how would that get, I guess, institutionalized into the city way of doing business for projects going forward? I guess that's just a question.
Would you all want me to cover that, or folks from the city, do you want to answer that?
I mean, I can start with a response.
Who wants to jump in?
Currently, the general plan does have policy thresholds for level of service. So any project that we would be reviewing in order to make proper findings of consistency with the general plan, we're going to need to address level of service to a point. How we go forward in the future is going to be, something we're going to have to work through. The other thing that comes up is all the permit streamlining that comes down through the state, and our ability to assess some of those impacts may be limited in the future as well. And so we'll try and balance the competing interests of region versus local as we review project level analysis. When you're done with your questions, I actually do have another question for Matt or David related to fees.
Actually, that was sort of related to my next question. Yours are probably much more eloquent, but today it seems like we impose conditions of approval in order to mitigate intersections that may be degraded to a level that is below what is acceptable in our general plan. In the future, when VMT analysis is what's mandated, but level of service may or may not be, are we still going to be allowed to impose fees as a condition of approval to correct an intersection? And maybe that's kind of where you also were going Lauren, with fees, but that was the gist of my question around what we can impose as a condition of approval in the future.
Yeah, I'll touch on that one as well. I mean, there has to be a nexus or relationship to the impact that we're conditioning. So where you run into some challenges is with cumulative impacts related to intersections and the like. You know, just because the last project in triggers a threshold issue, are they responsible for the entire problem or a prorated portion of it? So it's not an easy issue to resolve, and something we're going to have to focus on as we go forward at a project level. And it comes down to equity and fairness, you know, that one project's not pulling the load for everybody else. My fee question actually related to the regional fees and how those are going to work in a VMT model. And, you know, we have a trip-based fee collection and then a VMT policy that talks about reducing vehicle miles traveled and reliance on cars. And some communities have adopted mitigation programs through VMT. But has there been any thought of how we're going to bridge the gap between what are seemingly sort of conflicting models in terms of fee generation, you know, because we're all trying to reduce vehicle miles traveled, but at the same time, the fee structure is based on something else. And so do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know if David wants to weigh in.
I don't feel like I really have as much expertise on CCTA's fee collection system. So Matt, maybe you start and I'll see if there's anything I want to add.
Yeah, so I think one thing we have on our radar is updating the fee, the mitigation programs to reflect the change. What that looks like yet, we don't exactly know, but we know it's one of the you know, the loose ends in terms of tying everything up in a nice neat package related to going from trip-based fees to miles traveled based fees. So it's something that is on our radar. We wanted to get the kind of day-to-day stuff out of the way, but we recognize it's an issue that needs to be addressed. We are.
I would just add off the top of my head, and I'll be honest and say I haven't thought about this a lot yet, but two sort of conflicting points of view that might come into play. On the one hand would be, even though we're moving to VMT analysis for those regional and statewide environmental impacts, I believe you're collecting the fees primarily to improve the local roadway networks and other networks. And so in that sense, having a fee that continues to be trip-based and related to the local trip making might continue to make sense. And so I think that's one side to look at it. The other side is to think about what's happening now under the new administration at the national level and talking about moving away from a gas tax and to what is variously called a carbon tax or some other kind of tax like that, to capture the fact that we are now moving towards other kinds of trips, other kinds of modes, other kinds of vehicles, such as electrical vehicles, and that the collection of a fee just based on how much gas you pumped may not make as much sense as some other kind of tax. And we may want to look at those also, just like is happening at the federal level and the state level, to see if that makes sense also. So I don't have an answer at all, but I would point out both of those sets of issues as ones that we might look at as CCTA does study its fee structure.
And if I may also just to add on, the TriValley Transportation Development Fund is a regional fee. And so one of the things that other areas are looking at is adopting a regional fee. So in the Tri-Valley, all of the Tri-Valley cities, which is San Ramon, Danville, Pleasanton, Dublin, Livermore, and the unincorporated areas of Alameda and Contra Costa, we all collect within our own jurisdiction a TVTC regional fee. That fee is applied to regional projects. It is not applied to a local roadway project. So for example, in Central County, there's some talk about should they adopt a Central County regional fee, and that regional fee is applied to regional projects, such as what we're doing in the Tri-Valley. And so there are some discussions about What happens to your local fee? Do you still continue with your local fee? And most jurisdictions will likely continue, but should there, with VMT, should there now be more of an emphasis on these regional fees to address regional impacts and to apply those regional fees to regional projects? Because there are some parts of this county that do not collect a regional fee. So when there's a regional project, they're looking for money at the state or federal level for a regional project when in fact they're not collecting a regional fee. I'm not going to throw any part of the county under the bus and start talking about different parts of the county, but you know, there are some discussions that are taking place at the RTPC level about adopting VMT or regional fee programs to address VMT.
Thank you, Lisa. Do any of the other commissioners or staff for that matter have any questions for Mr. Kelly, Mr. Early, or Ms. Bobadilla? Seeing no heads bobbing up and down. Gentlemen and Lisa, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. I guess we'll look forward to seeing the final work product sometime later this year.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to item number 12, study sessions et al. 12.1, the current project update from Mr. Barr.
Thank you. I provided some of you updates on some recent projects. I thought I'd just do it as a more general and comprehensive list of things, as status updates, and then talk about a few things that are coming our way. You know, over the past several years, there are several projects that have been approved that, you know, for whatever reason, through funding, through COVID, just economic conditions have not, you know, broken ground yet, but they are technically still alive. And so the Rome development project is the first one that comes to mind that I'll touch on. That's, if you recall, the former outpost site, 169 residential units, about 6,000 square feet of commercial. And they've actually gone through the building permit process. They've gone through, they're currently working through their public art and master sign program work. And so they're at a point where they're basically getting close to being ready to pull permits. They're just in a situation where financing and cost of construction is a challenge. Now, their applications based on state law have been extended, so they're not in immediate jeopardy of expiring based on time limits or anything else. So we're hoping that, you know, as we come out of the COVID restrictions and the economy picks up, that we might see some activity with that. Likewise, the Aspenwood Senior Apartments project down on Kimball and Acosta, that's the 95 unit senior apartment project. That's also gone through building permit and site permit work. It's basically ready to issue, and again, it's financing and construction costs that are, and uncertainty with COVID that are sort of holding up things. We're hoping that they'll begin later this year, but again, that's just a timing question that private industry has to make. Likewise, with the Chang residential development up on the in the Northwest, those entitlements are still active. They've been working on getting some of their permitting through Fish and Game as well as LAFCO, and they're subject to the same entitlement extension that Rome was, so they're not immediately in jeopardy of violating any timelines or the like. I'll also touch on the Hampton Inn Hotel. That particular project was approved a couple of years ago, and it's actually, there's been no activity except for a request for permit extension, and we are expecting another request next month for a second of 3 extensions that is allowed by our code. They are not protected under the state extensions because they're not housing projects. So hopefully they'll start to gear up as they get closer to their potentially losing their entitlements or having to reprocess their entitlements. The City Center Hotel that was approved last year, they've actually been talking with planning staff, working on construction documents. They are, as you can understand, concerned about economic conditions of COVID and the like. But we're hoping that they'll get in later this year with plan check and head toward permit issuance. But again, they're just being a little bit cautious before they pull the trigger on permits. To touch briefly on the, some of you may be aware that the former Orchard Supply hardware site, we have an ACE hardware moving in there. So the application for the fitness center was essentially withdrawn. So we're hoping that the ACE will be operational this spring, late spring, early summer. And we think that's a good fit. Moving into a hardware store, hardware store into a hardware store, they don't have to do a lot of improvements. It's pretty well set up for them. So again, that's a really good fit for that shopping center. In terms of upcoming activities, we have a joint meeting we're scheduling with the City Council, and that's going to be on the 23rd of February. And the topics for that particular meeting will be a presentation on housing element update and the RENA standards. So we'll kind of revisit an overview of where we're at in that process and what some of the standards require and some of the challenges that we're going to have with our housing element update. And then the second part of that is we'll be talking about an application that's been filed for development of the Bishop Ranch 6 office site. And this is a residential project that's being proposed. It's a 31-acre site, Bishop Ranch 6 is. It'll be about 404 residential units, a combination of small lot, single family, and townhome. There is a specific plan amendment involved in that. They're going to be modifying the North Camino Ramon specific plan to deal with some of the consistency issues as well as affordable housing standards. There is a park design, a 2-acre park design that's part of it. And so we'll be providing an overview of that project and talking about some of the considerations moving forward with those revisions. And again, that's mostly an effort to give both the commission and the council an update of that application since it is a significant number of housing units. And then lastly, I'll just mention that we are moving forward with the walking district master plan. Design workshop is under contract, the planning services as well as the parks. We're starting up our stakeholder interviews with various folks in the area, and there'll be a series of design charrettes that will happen later this spring. Our hope is to get a draft plan before commission and city council early summer. So that's our current schedule. And so that's really all I have in terms of project updates. Right now, we do not have anything scheduled for the February 16th meeting. We did get a resubmittal on the Bridges Event Center, but it's not ready to come forward just yet. So we'll be working on that and bring that to you later this spring.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Barr? Mr. Marks.
I have two questions. They're not related to each other, but setting aside anything that under the COVID situation has required you to extend the life of a project, when a project is granted an extension under our code, is there any requirement that they show what efforts they've made so far and why they cannot build the project as originally anticipated?
Yeah, we ask for essentially a justification that, we're looking for diligent pursuit of the application. in the case of Rome, for example, they've gone through extensive permitting process, same with Aspen Woods. And so we look at what the impacts are of extending those entitlements in terms of what the applicant's already done in terms of vesting. And so it's not a clear-cut line that you check this box and that box. It's a judgment call that's being made by staff and zoning administrator that the application is reasonable to extend. And but again, we are limited in the number of extensions we can provide.
Are they required? I'm sorry, Lauren.
No, go ahead.
Are they required to provide their request, their justification in writing, or is it a discussion between the staff and the applicant?
It's a little of both, but we do ask for a formal letter requesting the extension, and typically they'll include some of our conversations about where they are in the process and what they're moving forward on. And again, it's not something that we're, severe about. I mean, we understand that projects take time, but at the same time, we want to make sure that they are moving in good faith toward, getting permits. And, and it can also be as simple as somebody reanalyzing some of their proposals. I mentioned in the case of the hotel that the Omega Hotel that we hadn't seen anything from them, but we have had some conversations about potential design revisions from them. So it's not that they haven't been incommunicado, but they haven't actually filed anything formal with us. And so they are still in contact with us.
I was thinking actually more of the Hampton Inn, where on several occasions now, when you've reported on the status of projects, you've told us that there's been no contact.
Well, again, I should say there's been no formal submittals. We do have contact with them via email and via phone calls on occasion, but they haven't told us that they're walking in tomorrow with a design set. That's what we mean. I should be clearer in how we phrase that. But the point is, they have not filed for building permits. They have not filed for any of the additional reviews that we talked about regarding street frontage improvements and the like. Those are still outstanding items for Omega. And Hampton Inn and Omega, I use the term interchangeably. It's the Omega location, but it is Hampton Inn that I was referring to before.
Okay. My second question, or really it's a comment, without talking about the project, one of the concerns that I've had, and we seem to have some time where we're canceling meetings, is taking a look at mixed use and what do we mean by it and what's the definition of it. Do we want to amend that? My concern, and I wonder if other commissioners share this concern, is that we will not have looked at that. The applicant will finally come in with an application, the clock will start to click, and there will not be time to do any kind of review of that before we're obligated to make a decision about the actual project at hand. And so I'm wondering, what could the staff put together something showing us a schedule of if we're going to address this issue, when we're going to address it, and how that dovetails with getting a little bit ahead of the actual project at hand?
Well, actually, I think as the commission knows, we are embarking on a significant update to our general plan, the comprehensive. Every element will be touched. And as part of that, we will be looking at the economic element, the retail analysis again that we just did in 2017, which really dovetails into the mixed use properties. So, and really works on identifying our housing sites. So really the best time we can bring some information as to, it's hard to say because the market really drives what occurs. And as Lauren had mentioned last time, it was a 50-50 split previously, but each shopping center is unique, has a different unique tenant type, different locations. So it's really hard to drive and determine a set percentage of non-residential versus residential. But through this next general plan update that we are doing and identifying the housing sites, and we have 5,100 units we need to allocate now, which is 2.5 times our current allocation. So those two conversations, I believe, really go hand in hand as to how we get to the answer to that question.
I don't dispute the way you'd like to do it. It's the timing of it. Will we be in the position where we have to make a decision regarding the marketplace proposal, if and when it gets filed, to have already taken a look at what we are trying to preserve relative to mixed use? If we could defer that until the timing that you're, or the project, or the plan that you're talking about, that would be fine. But after the fact feels a bit late.
Yeah, well, I would just also, in the case of marketplace or any other application that's floating around a possibility right now, we're in a tough situation with regard to SB 330. We don't really have the ability to go in and change standards. All it takes is a preliminary application to vest those standards, as was the case with several properties in the Crow Canyon area before the adoption of the Crow Canyon specific plan, the new plan. So even if we come to some revelation about what the proper amount of mixed use is, we have these other state mandates that make it difficult to lock that in. I will just say that SB 330 can, for a mixed use project to qualify for those streamlining under that, it has to be a minimum of 75% residential. So that by the reverse, 25% commercial would be the maximum commercial that you could allow under an SB 330 application. So again, that's another consideration. And again, it's not indefinite, but it's definitely something that we have to consider in terms of how we move forward on changing standards and adopting standards. It's a tough thing. There's no easy answer to it.
Yeah, and any change we make, we can't potentially reduce the density or the intensity of a residential property. And so our hands really are tied. And if we do something like that, as we had talked about the Crow Canyon, it has to be done concurrently. And so that's hence my comment about if we're going to look at, having a certain percentage of retail associated with a mixed use project, if we have to reduce or reallocate units on a certain site, we have to make up for them somewhere else in the city. And that has to be done together at the same time. And that's what this general plan update will be looking and touching all those properties that have housing. We have to do feasibility analysis, much like we did for the economic element update with the BR 2600 property. So it's really, and I get the frustration, and I understand that we all live that. SB 330 and a few other bills that have been adopted have really tied jurisdictions' hands into what we can and cannot do in the housing realm. And so hopefully through this next update that we'll be undertaking, we'll provide the city with a little more control of where we want to see our housing and how we want our retail centers to look going forward, especially in the mixed use environment.
How long does SB 330's restrictions last? I thought they lasted under the current legislation until 2024.
2025 is that, yes, but I rarely have seen a bill with a sunset that wasn't extended or maybe
not extended.
Continue on forever, basically. So I have a feeling that the provisions on SB 330, if itself is not extended, as you have seen with ADU bills, they just keep coming each year and improving or quote, building on the previous bill. So I really think the housing streamlining will continue. And there are a couple of bills working through the state right now. Atkins bill is one of them. That housing is a big thing with the legislature right now. So there's going to be a lot of housing bills being proposed and discussed. That's really going to make housing in the forefront and really push the governor's mantra is we need to build housing. The RENA numbers have shown, the amount of RENA that we've been allocated across the region really is pushing for housing production. So the bills are going to be focused on housing production.
Unless we get all these people to move to Boise, Idaho, or Austin, Texas.
Well, there you go. Yes.
Gary, do you have some questions?
I have an easier question, I think.
Oh, that was easy.
Lauren, on the joint meeting on the 23rd, you said you're going to present that require that BR6 project. It's a specific plan amendment. Is that the North Camino Ramon specific plan that needs to be touched?
Correct.
Okay, and that, I think I have a copy when I first got on the commission, but it's also on the webpage, right?
It is online, yes. Under
So if we wanted to be prepared, so in case we wanted to look like we actually know something before the meeting, we can go ahead and read it in advance, right? You know?
Sure.
Okay, and then any other pre-reading you might want to encourage us to do in advance of that meeting, so we look like we know what we're doing before.
Well, you can always get up to date on all the RENA studies and everything there if you really want to spend some time.
And I previously got some fabulous links from Ryan and Cindy to become an expert. Haha. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we did provide in the one of our updates some information from the TriValley Housing Committee on some analysis that's worth looking at as well, and you have that information, I believe. So, but again, it's going to be more of an overview and just sort of making sure both the commission and council understand what's coming, as well as, in terms of both the development project being proposed for BR6 as well as the RENA process.
And it's also for the public too, because, as part of the housing element update, we need to do public outreach. And so really wanting to make sure our residents know what's coming early before the RFP is released, and that we'll be engaging and working with the community as we move forward with how to provide housing in San Ramon.
Good idea. Great, thank you.
Of course.
Anybody have any other questions for Mr. Barr? Ms. Chamberlain, rumor has it that you want to make a closing comment.
Oh, well, I have a couple things. So as you know, we're in the process of remodeling City Hall, our new permit center. The construction is underway. I walked through it today, and it's kind of a shell right now. So gotta have a little vision to see what it'll look like when it's done. But we'll be moving at the end of April back over to City Hall. So you'll be able to find us all there. And 2401 will be going on renovations for the public safety building with the police and fire, as we discussed, plus the EOC. So a lot of moving parts going on, but we will be relocating in a few months, which is exciting for us, new digs. A permit center in City Hall will help our residents to have full access to all city services in one location, which will be great. We'll be releasing in the upcoming newsletter, the Planning Academy. We're hoping to hold it this fall in person. Hopefully with COVID restrictions, we'll be loosening, the vaccination's coming or is out and being released. So we're hoping to have our academy in person beginning in September. So we're excited to get back to that and educate our residents on the planning process. And honestly, it's really, really timely with this housing element update that we're beginning and the general plan update. So I think it'll be very fruitful to be able to get some of our residents to help, understand what we do and, share it with their friends and stuff. And then finally, the league is still going to be hosting the Planning Commissioners Academy. It will be virtual this year. The dates currently are towards the end of March, I think the 24th or the 23rd, but it may be moving a little bit. So I have a meeting Friday to figure out what date it's going to be, and we'll be selecting the topics. The track will be very similar to last year's track from what I'm seeing of the proposals that did come in. So I think Jean and Gary accompanied me last year to Sacramento, if I recall. And so it'll be very similar to the presentations you guys saw last year. So with it being virtual, we will have the ability, if the commissioners all want to attend, to cover the registrations on that, because there's no travel involved. So Lauren is probably cringing right now with me, but we can talk about that and who would like to attend and listen in. And other than that, that's all I got.
Do any of the commissioners have liaison reports they want to enlighten us with? Commissioner Kuznick, unmute yourself.
If only my husband had that option. Okay. So the Transportation Advisory Committee did meet, and I was the liaison to that. And the first topic that they covered was an update on the Iron Horse Bollinger Canyon pedestrian overcrossing bridge. It was quite a thorough review of the status of it and where the planning is going and things like that. There's still some discussion about the aesthetics, whether it's just a straight bridge or it's got some curves. But really the prevailing thing is trying to get this located in such a way as to minimize the impact on underground utilities, such as major sewer lines and those sorts of things, fiber optic communications, gas lines, those sorts of things. Issues about the fencing on the side. I mean, it's just a lot of things that are going into it. And they are in, the construction management is also in on the designs so that hopefully they are solving problems in the design portion that would normally crop up in the construction. So that's a good plan. The question will be on the one little street that comes out right there by the sports basement side of the Iron Horse. What's going to happen to that light? And it sounds like they'll need to keep the light there to make the left-hand turn out to Bollinger Canyon. I thought that was interesting. And then they're trying to figure out some way when you cross over the bridge, but you want to get off right there by the street, instead of having to go all the way down and then back, is there a way to get you down quickly? And it's like, oh, gee, never really thought about that. But it was really interesting to hear some of the details of it. And as a walker and a cyclist, I'm waiting, as I hope many of you are also waiting to get that finished. They said about 1 year and 3/4. We also heard about the updates to the traffic calming toolkit. No, the residential traffic calming toolkit is being updated. So they're very excited about that. Let's see. And then we got an update on the parking permits up in TriValley, which is up by Red Willow and that. That's still causing some consternation up in that neighborhood if you do follow on next door. And they will have to, they're on their own, right? Right, Debbie? So, it'll be interesting, you know. So it's funny how we hear so much about national politics, state politics, but you know, when it really comes down to it, you know, what matters to people is like, why are all these cars parked in my neighborhood, and are you speeding? And so our work is important. Okay, I just want to, you know, shout out to my fellow commissioners and to staff that what we do is important, often unnoticed in a good way, noticed when it doesn't go well, but you know, it is important, and these things do count. So thank you. That was my traffic advisory committee report. And then Gary and I, we have interviews coming up for the traffic advisory, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep all these meetings. My
Yes,
February is
in a
just
week or
jam
two.
packed.
In a week or so, whenever Jen tells us, we're there.
That's right. And then beekeeping tomorrow. We're just all a buzz. Just had to throw that one in. So thank you, I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Any of the other commissioners have any liaison reports? Not even about bees, okay.
No, not about these.
No.
So I attended Economic Development Advisory Committee, January 13th. They had a presentation on the Business Assistance Program overview from Townsend Associates. That's a consulting firm that the city hired several months ago to help small businesses located in San Ramon navigate the labyrinth of funding and grant opportunities that the state and feds created to help. And they're always looking to drum up businesses. So if you're aware of either a nonprofit or a small business that might benefit from grant money, and there's a lot of it that's not going untouched, go to the city's webpage and that'll help you get in touch with Townsend Associates. And they've actually helped a lot of small businesses figure out how to get grant money, and there's money to be had. And then the next day I attended the Architecture Review Board meeting, and they had a presentation from Camp Bow Wow. As you all recall, we saw Camp Bow Wow, and there were a couple of things that we suggested that they have the ARB take a look at their building and just having some minor touch-ups to the outside facade, and they did. They came back and had the architects look at that, and they all liked the tweaks to the building. It was minor. To me it was minor, but to the architects, they really enjoyed talking about it. Buildings, colors, windows, whether they were all aligned perfectly, along the, on the same plane. And then they also touched the planting, as you recall, along Faria Preserve. There was a strip of land that was either, city or applicant, and they wanted to make sure that the landscape matched nicely. And then the second thing, and Lauren kind of touched on this, the public art for the Rome project. And there were 3 potential pieces of art that the Arts Advisory Committee actually selects the art, but the ARB was selecting the placement of the art. And they had a very difficult time discussing the placement of the art and not discussing the art itself. They ultimately, with Cindy's guidance, managed to stay in their swim lane and only talk about the art placement and not the art as much as they wanted to. But they eventually got through it, and they made the recommendation on where to place the art on the property correctly, and that was the ARB. And that's my report for tonight.
Thank you, Gary.
The advisory committee will do their job at an upcoming meeting and select the art. And when the building's approved and starts construction, then the art will be placed. So, but all 3 are very nice, though. By the way, all 3 pieces are very nice. I think you'll all like it, whatever it is.
I hope they got a piece from the old outpost property for old time's sake.
None of them are gamblers. None of them are card themed at all. I can tell you that much. Yeah, it's all public. You can all find it on the webpage someplace.
Okay, either Commissioner Marks or Commissioner Frank have any liaison reports?
No.
Okay. Any final questions or comments from either Ms. Chamberlain or Mr. Barr?
Nothing here.
Left to right, not up and down. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. And then I guess our next meeting will be with our friends of the City Council.